Hello friends, today let's talk about the poem The Darkling Thrush written by Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy is one of the most popular British poets who lived from 1840 to 1928, and his long career spanned the Victorian and the modern eras. He was born during the Victorian period and he continued to live into the modern eras. And he was a great influence on young writers like Siegfried Sassoon, Rupert Brooke, W.B. Yeats, Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, W.H. Auden. And generally, he was not of a very happy and a cheerful temperament. And many of his works exhibit a very bleak outlook of life. And he began by writing novels, but embittered by the fierce criticism that his novels received, he abandoned fiction to write poetry. It was at the later part of his life that he started writing poetry, and he was a prolific writer, and he churned out work after work, and during his lifetime he managed to get 1,000 of his poems, at least 1,000 of his poems published. So that prolific he was. Most of his poems are intimately connected to his own life, and he was a keen observer of the world, and that helped him to create works of universal significance, because people living in any part of the world can very easily relate to the poems that he has written. And Virginia Woolf has commented on this particular aspect of Thomas Hardy's poems. Let me read to you what Virginia Woolf has said about his poetry. It is no mere transcript of life at a certain time and place that Hardy has given us. It is a vision of the world and of man's lot as they reveal themselves to a powerful imagination, a profound and poetic genius, a gentle and humane soul. So he saw the world in all its fullness, and through his poetic genius he interpreted what he saw and presented before us as beautiful works of prose and poetry. Now this particular poem that, of course, before I go on to the poem, let me also mention, or maybe I should mention, Thomas Hardy is remembered not only for his poems but also for his very famous novels like The Mayor of Casterbridge, Under the Greenwood Tree, The Mayor of Casterbridge, Under the Greenwood Tree, Far from the Madding Crowd, Tess of D'Urbervilles. Okay, so many beautiful novels he has written. So he is actually more popular as a novelist than as a poet. Now coming to this particular poem that I have taken up for discussion today, the poem is titled The Darkling Thrush. In fact, he had given a different title to this poem when he wrote it first, and the title was By the Century's Deathbed. And that is because he wrote this poem at the close of the century. That is, it was written in 1899, and the next year would mark the beginning of a new century. So that is why he called his poem By the Century's Deathbed, because it was the last few days of 1900. So it is believed to have been written in 1899, and then it was published the next year in 1900 for the first time in a British illustrated newspaper titled The Graphic, and it came out in December 1900, and then later it was once again published in 1901 too. And when Hardy later on compiled his poems, he has brought out many compilations of his poems. So they were all random compilations according to his mood and according to what he felt, some criterion that he had. He used to just choose poems for his collections. Some of them were remarkable poems, but some were poems of inferior quality. And this particular poem, The Darkling Thrush, was included in the collection titled Poems of the Past and Present. So Now, what is the significance of the title? I guess we'll discuss it towards the end of the poem after we've gone through the whole thing. Let's just quickly read the poem. The Darkling Thrush. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outlined, his script the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead in a full-throated evensong of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around, that I could think they trembled through his happy good night air, some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. So that's the poem for you. Now let's go back to the first stanza. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey. So it is an evening, late evening maybe, and he says, in the sense the speaker, he says that he stood there leaning upon a coppice gate. Now a coppice is a wooded area that is, it's a controlled wood, in the sense that the vegetation there is periodically it is cut down to ensure that it is either for the sake of a firewood or it's a kind of a plantation. So it is a kind of a wooded area, but which is regularly kept under control, in the sense farmer, he cuts down the trees, doesn't allow them to grow to a great height, and he clears the vegetation once in a while, keeps them to a certain level. So that kind of a place is a coppice. So he says that there was a coppice there, and he was standing at the gate of the coppice, leaning onto this coppice, and he was just looking at the evening fading around him. When frost was spectre grey, so there was this frost, it was pretty cold, and because the next line he says, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. So what is this weakening eye of day? It is the eye of the day is the sun. So the sun was very weak because it was the season of extreme winter. Winter's dregs. Dregs are generally, what is dregs? Dregs is when you drink coffee, for instance. When you reach the bottom of the glass, you know that the coffee powder would go and settle there. That sediment, that deposit at the bottom is called the dregs. So most brewed liquids, they have this dregs at the bottom, settling at the bottom. And so winter's dregs, in the sense that the season of winter is ongoing, and the remains of the remnants, dregs also means remnants. So the remnants of winter, like extreme cold and frost and a cold wind, all that is still there. And all these together, they weaken the sun. So the frost, frost is again cold, extreme cold, and it was spectre grey. So this frost made everything appear ghostly. Spectre is a ghost, and there was a grey kind of shroud of frost everywhere, which made the whole place look quite eerie, a ghost-like appearance. So when frost was spectre grey and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day, the dreariness of winter has affected the sun too, and so That is why he says that it has made desolate, unhappy. Even the sun has been rendered unhappy because of this overwhelming winter, the overwhelming effect of this winter. The tangled vine stems cord the sky like strings of broken lyres. So vine stem must be some kind of a creeper. And so when he stands and looks, he can see the creepers scoring the sky, in the sense they are kind of stretching into the sky. They are extending the tendrils are hanging out, and so they're all tangled together. So they remind him of the strings of broken lyre. It's a simile here. A lyre, you know, is a musical instrument. And so when a string breaks off, sometimes it just curls up and hangs in mid-air. And that is what he is reminded of when he looks at the vine stems, like strings of broken lyres. And all mankind that haunted night had sought their household fires. And there is no other human being in sight. All the people who were there, or who had been there maybe some time ago, they have all gone back to their houses, all gone back to their homes, and they are now ensconced very safely inside their homes by their fires, near the fireplaces. So there is nobody outside, whereas the speaker, instead of going in and seeking shelter and warmth near a fireplace, he stands all alone outside and looks at the sky and the surroundings, and he stands there near the copse gate. So that is stanza 1. In the next stanza, the land's sharp features seem to be the century's copse outlined. His script the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. So it is very obvious that the speaker is in a very unhappy mood. He's all gloomy, and he's kind of got a very bleak perception of what he sees around him. And so he can, as he stands there, he can see the land's sharp features, in the sense maybe there are some rocks or boulders or mountains or something in front of him. He sees that they look like the century's copse outlined. The century's copse, because this is, remember, the year 1900, or even if it's 1899, it is the end of a century. So when he looks at the land, the topographical features around him, he feels that it looks like the century's copse outlined. It's as if the copse of the century is compared to a human being, and it's as if the dead body of the century is leaning outward like this rock that is jutting outside. So here you have a metaphor where the land's features are compared to the copse of the century. And then he goes on, he extends this metaphor further, and he says the cloudy canopy, that is the cloudy sky, the dark cloudy sky, looks like his crypt or his grave. Canopy, you know, is a covering, an umbrella like covering. So the sky, the unpleasant dark sky, clouded sky, looks like his crypt. The crypt, as I told you, is the grave, and this crypt acts as a grave for the dead century, and the wind is death lament. He doesn't stop with that. He extends his metaphor further to say that the wind that is howling around with an unpleasant noise sounds like the death lament of the dying or the dead century. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. So he says that all powers of regeneration and birth, germ is birth, regeneration. So the ancient pulse, there has been this pulse of regeneration that has been, coming down from centuries, from one generation to the next. But now he feels that it has all shrunken up and had dried, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless. Fervor is enthusiasm. it's energy, it is interest. But everything is frivolous. All the other human beings, all the creatures uh, like him, they are all frivolous. They have no enthusiasm. They are dejected. They are desolate. They have nothing to look forward to. Now, what do you think has prompted Thomas Hardy to be so pessimistic? It's because Thomas Hardy, there might be many things. That is, one, um, during the, I told you in the beginning that he lived during the Victorian era and into the modern period too. So at that time, the world witnessed a lot of changes, unsettling changes. During the Victorian era, it was a time when there was a lot of um, scientific progress and industrialization. So more and more people began to lose faith in God and religion, and they began to accept science as more important than God. So the lack of faith or the eroding faith, that was one characteristic of that period. And again, with the coming of industrialization, uh, the social fabric again was subjected to change, in the sense that factories were set up in cities like London and Manchester and many such places, Birmingham, where you have all kind of mining industry and many other factories too, with a lot of machineries being invented. And so more and more people abandoned their lives in the rural areas and villages, and they went off to the cities. So the so-called innocence and purity of villages and rural life, of the rustic life, that was lost, and people became more materialistic. So all this was happening during this Victorian period. Generally, there was a lot of restlessness, and it is all that that must have affected Thomas Hardy too. And so he says that everybody is unhappy, everybody is desolate. It's as if we have nothing to look forward to. So everybody is frivolous because there is no color, there is no music, there is no life, there is no promise of anything happy. So future seems to hold no promise. So that is why he is so unhappy. And now we are going on. So in the first two stanzas, we saw that there is all desolation and unhappiness and pessimism, a grey tone, both in the mind of the speaker and in the external world. So here we can see that pathetic fallacy, the poetic device has been applied, because the unhappiness of the poet has been transferred to the nature around him. The spectre grey, that is not just the color of the winter outside, but it is the color of hopelessness, frivolousness that he feels inside. So the first two stanzas give us a very bleak picture, and then something else, something happens, something transforming happens in the third stanza. Let's see what that is. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead in a full-hearted even song of joy illimited. So breaking all his unpleasant gloomy thoughts, suddenly he hears a voice. And where does he hear it from? Among the bleak twigs overhead. So there are trees above, the boughs or branches extend over his head. They are all bleak, in the sense they are all grey, because it's winter, there are no leaves. That's why he calls it bleak twigs. Twigs, sticks, branches. And from somewhere among these bleak twigs, he suddenly hears a voice in a full-hearted even song of joy illimited, unlimited. So a very happy voice, a song of great happiness, a full-hearted, somebody singing at the top of his voice. An even song. What is even song? Even song is actually the evening prayer offered in the Anglican churches. According to the Anglican Christianity, in the evening prayer was called the even song. So just like an even song, because the time, is evening, there is this happy song that is heard. And who is singing this? He reveals that in the next few lines. He says, an aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So it's no human song that we he had mentioned, but it is the song of this little bird, a thrush, an aged one that too, not a young one, an old, frail, is weak, gaunt again, is thin and haggard and weak. Maybe because birds often get weak during winter because their food supply is restricted, because almost all creatures go under this white snow cover and there's very little food available outside. And so generally all creatures, that is why we know that some animals just go into hibernation, because they know that nothing will be available. And so this bird, it is wet, it is cold, it is old, it's a thrush, okay, frail, gaunt and small, in blast beruffled plume. It's got this plume is its feathers, and blast here is the strong winds, the storm. So earlier you remember he mentioned that the wind, the howling wind that sounded like the death lament. Now it is that wind that he is talking about as the blast. The blast beruffled plume. So this wind has ruffled the feathers of this bird. That is why blast beruffled plume. So this bird has nothing to be happy about. It is, it has been subject to the intense cold of the wind. The wind has ruffled its plumes. It is, as I said, it's old, it is weak, it is small. In spite of all that, it sings so happily, so loudly. So the bird had chosen thus to fling his soul. So it is as if his entire soul has been, thrown out in that ecstatic song upon the growing gloom. So the light all around was fading because evening was slowly plunging into darkness, into the darkness of the night. And so suddenly this bird song has a transforming effect, and he sings wholeheartedly, full-heartedly into the growing. He releases his happy song into the growing gloom. And that makes the speaker wonder. And he wonders, so little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around. So he says, I don't see any reason for carolings. Carolings, a song. Carol, is a song. So he says, I don't see any cause for such a happy song, ecstatic sound. Ecstasy, is extreme happiness. So I don't see any cause for this bird to sing like this. I don't see anything, at least visible around me, was written on terrestrial things afar. So he looks around. He wonders, what is it that the bird is so happy about? What induces it to sing, or what inspires it to sing so happily? So he looks around and says, no, I don't see anything. I don't see any cause for such a happy song was written on terrestrial things, in the sense anything on earth. He cannot see, like there is no flower that has bloomed, there is no insect that is flying around so that this bird is happy that he has found a prey. No, nothing is there. Afar or nigh around, nigh somewhere nearby. For far or near, I don't see any cause for this bird to sing so happily. That I could think there trembled through his happy good night air some blessed hope, whereof he knew, and I was unaware. So he says that since I couldn't find anything outside or around me, I understand that it is something inside the bird that has made him sing. So there trembled through his happy good night air. So somewhere within his heart, he experiences some kind of a hope. And it is that hope that has made him sing. Maybe the bird knows that very soon winter will pass and the spring season will come. Winter is not going to last forever. So it is the hope of the forthcoming spring and happiness and warmth and food. Maybe that is what inspires the bird to sing. And we generally have this way of saying that animals can read the world better and deeper than we can. We know how when disasters are going to occur, dogs get terribly upset. Um, Animals can sense it, we believe. The birds start flying around in panic. So same way, he says, this bird definitely knows some blessed hope. Hope that, you know, things will be better soon. Hope that regenerates and replenishes faith. So something, and he says, he knew about it. He here is the bird. So the bird knew about it, and I was unaware. So I was not aware of this hope. He, a human being, had almost given up looking around at the things happening, the unpleasant um, uh, events taking place around him. He had decided that the world is going to end in disaster, that there is nothing to save the world. But he now feels that this bird definitely senses some kind of a hope that I am unaware of. So it is this hope that is the central theme of this poem. The poem begins in great desolation and pessimism, but it definitely ends in optimism. So if this little creature can harbor this hope in its mind, then why can't I? That is the thought that he conveys. So why can't we human beings find some reason to be hopeful, some reason to be happy? And why can't we find some purpose to go on with our lives? So, as I mentioned now, the main theme here is hope. And here we also know that this winter that he spoke about in the beginning, in the first stanza, it's not just the season of winter that he's talking about. He's talking about the end of the century. He's talking about the end of the year, the end of the day, because it is evening, moving on to night. So generally, the evenings have a gloomy, they can make you quite gloomy, especially if you're alone. Here it is all that, and this unhappiness about this Western culture, the degradation, the degeneration of Western culture, of society, the lack of faith. So winter symbolizes all that. It's not just the season he's talking about. So from a point of losing hope and giving up entirely on humanity, this little bird brings him back to hopes of future. And again, this comparison of the bird song to an even song. An even song, I told you, is the evening prayers, the evening hymns sung in Anglican churches. So an Anglican Christianity is what was followed in Britain. So the comparison of the bird song to the even song can also be read as having religious significance. So maybe he is trying to tell us that going back to religion, regaining faith in God, may be the answer for the hopelessness that the world was experiencing then. So maybe he's trying to tell us, like Matthew Arnold too, who went of course before him. Matthew Arnold too was terribly upset about this lack of faith. He too uses this word darkling plain, where people fight each other not knowing who they are fighting. So there too it was this feeling, this fear of losing faith. And so here maybe the poet is trying to tell us that God or faith is the only answer to all our troubles, that we have, man should restore faith, regain faith in order to find a purpose in life. So that might be what he's trying to tell us in this poem. And now about the title, how would we interpret this title, The Darkling Thrush? Of course, the thrush is clear. It is the bird that he spoke about, the thrush that sang. And what is this darkling? Darkling is something that is getting dark, dark and getting darker. So darkling can refer to the symbolic darkness in the mind of the speaker, and the darkness that he felt was engulfing the whole of the Western civilization because of the progress of science and industrialization and materialism, and the darkness due to the receding faith. So it can be that, or it can also refer to the darkening evening. And it can also talk about this. He can hear the thrush, he can see it also, but maybe the thrush itself is dark in color, or maybe he's calling it a darkling thrush because it's sitting somewhere in the dark branches of the tree. Many reasons why he calls it the darkling thrush, because he cannot really see it very clearly, but then he did see it and saw that it was frail and weak and old, and so it might be the color of the bird that he is referring to as darkling, or it might be that the bird is in hiding inside somewhere in the branches of the tree in the darkness. He cannot he can hear the song, but he cannot really see the bird very clearly. Or it can be the general pessimism of the times that he implies by the darkling. So whatever it is, finally the poem ends in relief, and it's as if you are walking through a dark tunnel, and towards the end you see a light there. That is the feeling I get when I read this poem. The first two unhappy, desolate stanzas slowly leading to a light, and from there onwards you have something to guide you on. So that's all that I have to say about this particular poem. It's a beautiful poem and a very popular one too. So I guess that's it.